Well, it's election season once again, so time for more candidate conversations. Today I've got PADDY McGUIRE with me. He's running for Mason County Auditor. Hi, Paddy. How are you?
Very well. Good morning.
Thanks for being here with me. First things first, tell us a little bit about yourself and why you are running for auditor.
So I'm an Olympia boy originally. I've lived here in the county almost 5 years now, but have been in the elections business for almost 20 years. I have more than 20 years of experience in government finance, and what I want to do is bring professionalism, not politics, to the Mason County Auditor's Office. I think Karen Herr has done a great job, and I want to follow on the work that she's done and be an elections professional for Mason County.
You kind of mentioned it already, but the auditor's position is kind of unique as it comes to county government, as it looks over not only the budgets, but also the elections in the county. So talk to me a little bit more about the role of the auditor and how you would work in each of those two categories.
So on the election side, I've got, as I say, almost 20 years experience in elections. I was Deputy Secretary of State in Oregon, implemented the first vote-by-mail general election in the history of the United States in 2000. Then later went to work for the Department of Defense for a thing called the Federal Voting Assistance Program that works to make sure that service people and their families and citizens living overseas get to vote wherever they are in the world. So I've worked at sort of the 20,000-foot level elections at state government. I've worked at the sub-orbit at the federal level. I've never worked on the ground in a local elections office, and that's what's really interesting to me about this job and why I want to do it. In government finance, I have managed budgets big and small. When I was Deputy Secretary of State, the budget of our office was about the same size as the budget of Mason County, and so I have a sense of that. Managed 200 employees. I think I am prepared for this job, but I've got a lot to learn too, and that's what excites me about it.
One of the things in Mason County is that we have high numbers of eligible voters, but as the vote totals come in, we see low numbers in voter turnout. What are some ways, and is it the auditor's is it up to the auditor to try to impress upon the eligible voters that every vote counts and to improve voter turnout?
I do believe that voter turnout is a responsibility of county auditors. Julie Wise in King County has really pushed the concept of free postage, which was first introduced in King County this year, and then the Secretary of State and the governor found the money to extend that statewide. I think that's a great step. I think the last legislature took a number of really important steps in allowing 16 and 17-year-olds to pre-register, which is great to be able to get kids while they're still in school registered to vote, and so when they turn 18, you send them a ballot and they're ready to go. Mm-hmm. I want to focus on turnout, and I think that should be a measure of my success when I'm done is how well we do it with turnout. I also recognize that Mason County doesn't have a lot of money. There's no public information officer anywhere outside the sheriff's office, and so our ability to do what they do in King County just isn't going to happen. Mm-hmm. Julie's got 5 or 6 people who do that full time.
Right.
Mason County, in the entire county outside the sheriff's office, doesn't have any. So, I don't want to promise things I can't deliver on, but within the realm of what's possible, I want to focus on that. I want to spend time in schools talking to kids about the importance of getting registered and actually handing them a card, or more likely showing them on their phone how to do it. Uh-huh. And so that I think that's an important role of the auditor.
What can you tell me about your understanding of the current Mason County budget and some of the shortfalls and some of the ways the money is spent? And talk to me a little bit about that.
Well, in my discussions with Karen Herr, the current auditor, the budget in the auditor's office, like all of Mason County, is very lean. she doesn't have a travel budget. When she goes to Olympia to testify before the legislature, she drives her own car and doesn't get mileage. She doesn't go to national conferences. So, there are very real challenges and very real needs. I mean, this community has to address the jail situation. And even though the auditor's office isn't directly involved in that, I want to try and help provide leadership to address the needs in the community. And I think being a steward over tax dollars and making sure that tax dollars are being spent well and raising red flags when I see things that give me pause, I think will help to get us on a path to solving some community problems. But I have no illusions about the situation in the county. I mean, it's tough, and but I'm cheap by nature, and so I think have the skills and have the experience to be able to look at budgets and look at how people are spending money and maybe have some suggestions about how to do that more efficiently.
You talked about some of your experience in the elections and in budgetary processes for government. What are some of your other background experience that would fit you well in the auditor's office?
Well, so I have been running. I have been working on the sort of business side of elections here in Mason County. I mean, I had a job offer coming from the Department of Defense where I could pretty much move anywhere in the world. I came to live here on Harstein Island because it's a little bit of heaven. Both my wife and I have family close by, so I think I have worked for a business in the last year. I've been doing a consulting business, have been self-employed, and been paying taxes here in Mason County. And so, I understand business, I understand how that works, I understand billing and payroll and all that kind of stuff. And so, I think I am uniquely prepared to be the auditor, and I'm looking forward to it.
Talk to me about any audit finding reports that you've done and you've come away with going, that all came together very well, or that didn't seem to come together very well.
So when I was Deputy Secretary of State, in Oregon, the Secretary of State in Oregon is the state auditor. I had 75 auditors that worked for me. The most egregious example during my years there was an audit we did of the state lottery that looked at their business practices, and they, although they were part of state government, they argued that they were a business and should operate like a business. And so they gave gifts to employees that just weren't appropriate for government. They paid for first-class travel for their executives that just wasn't appropriate for government. And their argument was, we're a business, and we came in and said, well, yes, you generate revenue, but so do a lot of parts of government. I mean, the DMV generates a lot of revenue too, and their director doesn't need to fly first class. So it was a pretty hard-hitting audit, and that led to the director of the lottery being fired. So, I understand auditing. I understand taking a hard look at government functions and the way things operate. I'm reasonably certain that there's nobody in Mason County flying first class. I'm not sure there's anybody flying much of anywhere. But I think it's taking a look at the way government operates and being willing to go toe-to-toe with folks. The better way to audit and what we strived for was going in and having independent eyes and looking at an operation and then sitting down with the management before we went public and said, listen, here are the problems. And at the end of the audit, coming forward with the management from the agency and the auditors and sitting down together and saying, yeah, we found these problems, and here are the 6 things that the agency is going to do to address those problems and move forward. In the case of the lottery, they didn't want to do that. They said, you're wrong, you don't know what you're talking about. And the head of the lottery ended up getting fired.
Wow, wow. Let's move now into the auditor's office itself, and we have seen, budget cuts over the years, which has led to lack of service on certain days and shortened hours, things like that. What about the auditor's office and their budget are you familiar with, and how would you be able to kind of either stretch the dollars a little bit more or make it a little more fiscally responsible?
From everything I know about dealing with the office, and my personal dealings with the office and the people I talk to in business who deal with the office daily, there's a great staff that works really hard under some pretty lousy circumstances. I mean, there haven't been a lot of pay raises. There's not a lot of room for growth, not a lot of money for training. Those sort of things can't go on forever if you want to retain good employees and not have them go work for the state or leave and just because they're fed up. And so Mason County's going to have to find a way to get its house in order to be able to treat employees well, give them adequate training, give them adequate opportunities for advancement. I don't have a magic answer for how we do that. There was an attempt to raise money through additional taxes. It went down resoundingly, unsurprisingly. But this cycle of asking employees to do more with less, I think, is about at its end.
Yeah.
And so it's something I'm very concerned about, and hopefully we'll be able to work with employees to keep them happy, keep them there, so that they can provide the public service that is so important and that people depend on. That said, I am willing to take a look at any of the functions in the office that, pretty much everything the auditor's office does is required by law or pays for itself. And so, in that kind of situation, I don't know, other than going to the commissioners and making the argument that these are things we got to do. On the other piece of that is, I want to go to the legislature and say, you need to pay for more of elections. The legislature is always happy to pass requirements and say, do these 12 new things with elections and go do it. And we're not going to give you 10 cents. There are 9 states in the country where the state pays for all or a portion of general and primary elections. In Washington State, the state doesn't provide a nickel other than this year with postage for the first time. So hopefully that's part of a trend. The Secretary of State just got almost $9 million from new federal dollars to work on cybersecurity. She's keeping all of it in her office, giving nothing to the counties. Well, that's ridiculous. Counties run elections, and we need to go and make the argument to the legislature that they need to step up and pay for a portion of the elections.
You mentioned the strong staff in the auditor's office. What makes a good team?
I think you need to impress on people the mission of what you're doing, that elections is about confidence, and customer service, and licensing is about customer service and making sure people are treated well and happy. And I think strong leadership, I think people who, one of the things I worked on a lot in the Secretary of State's office, bigger agency, obviously, 200 employees, was pushing decision-making down in the agency, not having every decision made at senior management. You have smart employees who are working hard, who know how to do things, and letting them make decisions, and then having their back when people grumble. I mean, there were a number of times where I went before legislative committees and got yelled at by legislators over decisions that were made below me, and I wasn't always completely thrilled to be in that position, but having people's back and being willing to say, you know, here's how we came to that decision, and this is why it was well thought out, and this is why it was important, and not throwing people under the bus, I think says a lot to employees about what's important.
One of the proposals by one of the current county commissioners is to move to a 2-year budget pattern. Do you find that that is responsible, feasible, be better for the county?
I've done both. I've lived in the federal government. You have annual budgets, and I don't think anybody on earth would argue that doing budgeting the way the Congress does is smart, and I certainly wouldn't. Oregon had a biennial budget, and I liked it. I mean, it allowed agencies a little more breathing time in terms of executing the budget and having some ability to plan for what's going on. With an annual budget cycle, you're always doing about 3 things. You're always doing budget preparation and execution and closeout, and it's a lot of work. Mm-hmm. And I think with a 2-year cycle, it gives employees more certainty. It gives, in some ways it's harder because you have to be more certain of the revenue coming in, and as we've seen in the city of Shelton, it's really important to be right about those things. So there's more risk, but I think from an agency perspective, a 2-year budget really makes sense.
You may not have to weigh in on this at a county level, but perhaps if you become the auditor, you could be asked this on a statewide issue. What are your thoughts on voter ID?
So I've thought about this a lot. When I was at the Department of Defense, we worked a lot on voter ID. It was sort of at the height of this as a national trend of enacting voter ID laws. Several of the proposals were very onerous, particularly for military and overseas voters who weren't there, who were required to photocopy ID and send it back and do all sorts of crazy stuff that's really, really hard if you're at a forward operating base in Yemen to have a copy machine if you want to vote. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, as generally, I think it is solving a problem that doesn't exist. The number of people who are voting illegally by every reasonable estimate is minuscule. When I was Deputy Secretary of State, all the prosecutions for election crimes in the state came across my desk before they went to the Attorney General's office for prosecution. There was one in 7 years that I was there was one for a non-citizen voting. It was a woman who was a British citizen who had a multi-million-dollar house on the Oregon coast and wanted to vote against a property tax measure. Not what most people would have you believe is what's going on with non-citizens voting. Yeah. In my experience, people who are not documented and here legally don't go out of their way to make themselves apparent to the government. Mm-hmm. They don't go out of their way to commit felonies. Most of them that, in my experience, want to work and raise their families and stay under the radar, not jump in front of the radar. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So again, I think most voter ID laws are solving a problem that doesn't exist.
In the last minute or two, look at the camera there. Tell the voters why they should bring you into the auditor's office.
So I'm running for county auditor because I believe that Mason County needs an elections professional someone who understands the mechanics of elections, understands how complex elections are, understands the challenges around cybersecurity and making sure that our elections are fair and free and accurate, and that the right people, the people who are legally allowed to participate, and that we do everything we can to encourage everybody who is legally eligible to participate. I also want to watch over your tax dollars. I want to make sure I'm cheap at heart, and I want to make sure that your tax dollars are spent well, and that there's somebody looking at the money going out. That's the role of the county auditor, is money flowing out of the county to make sure that those dollars are being spent well. And because I never forget when I've been in public service that people work really hard for the tax dollars that pay my salary and pay for the chair I'm sitting in and everything else. And that's what I want to do and bring to Mason County as your county auditor.
He is running for Mason County Auditor, and it's Paddy McGuire. Thank you.
Thank you.